We're talking today with Everett Stevens of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, now, Mr. Stevens, can you start with some background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Waterville, Maine, and went to school at Goodwill Schools in Hinckley, Maine, and was drafted in my senior year and when I was in Goodwill School, and wound up in Fort Devens for my military.
Okay. Just to back up a moment, what year were you born?
I was born 1/25/24.
Okay, 1924. All right. And what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My dad was a civil engineer, worked for the State Department part of that time, and during the war days, the pay was so good on the railroad, he became a fireman on a railroad.
Okay. Now, in the 1930s, during the Depression, did he have regular work or just
No,
part-time?
that was very irregular.
Okay.
One day in a local store, 2 days in a local garage. It was kind of split up.
So he wasn't always doing civil engineer work?
Oh no, that was at the end of the Depression.
Okay. All right. Now, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, one morning I was on my way to get the morning paper at the local store, and somebody called out, and Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And from that on, I didn't pay much attention to it because I was only about a second year in high school, I think it was.
All right. So you didn't think that affected you yet?
No, it didn't affect us.
Okay. Now, before Pearl Harbor, were you paying any attention to the news, what was happening in Europe or anything like that?
Well, actually, in high school, I studied French, Latin 2 years, and French 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We lived 38 miles from the line to Quebec, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So during my second year of French, our local school got a paper out of Quebec. I compared the news reports of the war in Europe. I compared the two. I learned to read French pretty well doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I spent at least an hour a day comparing the two reports. Because the press reports were the same.
Okay.
I want to translate it different.
All right. So the Canadians were getting the same information that we were.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And actually, in Maine, before the U.S. got into the war, they flew bombers and aircraft to Limestone, Maine, eastern Maine,
Mm-hmm.
towed them across the line into Canada, and the Canadians took over and then flew it to Labrador and to England and used those same aircraft back before the U.S. actually got into it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you knew some things were going on. Did you know that there might be a war with Japan, or was Japan a surprise?
It wasn't at that time, no.
Okay. All right.
During when I was early high school, maybe grade school, they sold scrap metal. Japan bought it,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was doing some of that. And then 2 years before I was drafted, I volunteered to be a spotter in case the Germans wanted to come into the U.S. on the East Coast. So I did that for a year or two as what they call a spotter.
So did you have to learn like the silhouettes of German planes or things like that?
Not at that time.
Okay.
When I was in the military, I had to learn to spot those. At a split second, I could spot maybe 4 or 5 German aircraft and name them. I know what they were up to, just because on the screen. But I was in the military at that time.
Okay. All right. So you're not doing that as a civilian. Okay. Now, how did you wind up going into the service? Were you drafted?
I was drafted.
All right. And when did you get your draft notice?
Well, I got my draft notice actually on my birthday, 1943.
Okay.
But they gave me time to finish that grade in school,
Mm-hmm.
which happened to be my senior year. And so 3 years after I graduated from high school, I was called in.
Or 3 years, or 3 days, or 3 weeks?
3 days.
3 days, yeah. Okay, all right. And so, what month was that you actually started? Was it June or May?
That was June.
Okay.
I graduated June 14th and was drafted, I'd say, June.
Reported on the 17th?
17th,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. Now, where did they send you for basic training?
I was drafted into Fort Devens, Massachusetts, in a city called Air, Mass, A-Y-R. And when they asked me what I wanted to do, I told them I wanted to be a navigator in the Air Corps. And they didn't know what I was talking about. They said, Air Corps would put that down. So I had to wait to take a test transfer out of the Army into the Air Corps. And I waited about 5 weeks to do that. There was 40-something of us that went and took that test. Half the group passed the test. I was in that group that passed.
Okay.
And it was August 16th when I actually got the notice to go to basic training in the Air Corps, which happened to be Gulfport, Mississippi.
All right. Now, so you went to Fort Devens, you took the test at Fort Devens. Did you stay at Fort
I
Devens then?
stayed there all that time.
All right. And what did they have you do while you were there?
I worked in the supply depot
Okay.
on the base. New recruits coming in, issued new uniforms, and when they transferred out, they had to turn those back in, the blankets and all that stuff. And I got used to doing that. And so I did that for most of 5 weeks.
Okay. And then how did they get you down to Mississippi?
Pacific?
No, to Mississippi. Well, you go for your training. How do they get you from Massachusetts to Mississippi?
By train.
Okay. And do you remember that train ride?
Well, it was so new to me because I wasn't used to doing anything outside of New England. Because the furthest I'd been from my home was Worcester, Massachusetts.
How long did it take you to get to Mississippi?
Oh, I'd say 3 or 4 days.
Okay. And could you see outside the train, or did they shut you up inside?
Well, we were in a coach,
Okay.
and from Cleveland to St. Louis, we was on a train line called Nickel Plate. They stopped at every farm and barnyard, picked up milk and I mean, that took 2 or 3 weeks just on that. Train ride wasn't that long. In fact, a couple of guys missed a train pulling out of a certain village, and they got a ride to the next town, got back on the train again. Nobody knew the difference.
Okay. All right. And then, what was the when you get down to Mississippi then? What did the training consist of there?
Well, the basic training, in 6 weeks, I lost 20 pounds, and in August, early September, it was pretty warm down there. I wasn't used to that at all, and I was there 6 weeks.
And what were they teaching you there?
Well, all the basic things in the military, how to crawl around on the ground and fire small weapons.
So fire rifle and...
We did all that stuff.
Okay. And did you have to learn to follow orders and salute and that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, you'd better.
All right. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to that?
I took it because I knew I had to, that's all.
Okay. Now, were there some men who were training there who had a hard time?
Well, I didn't know too much about that,
Okay.
but I got sick when I was there because I got a reaction to my smallpox shot. When I went in the military, I hadn't had any childhood shots at all because my folks didn't believe it. So my first 2 days in the military, they gave me the whole works. and we had what we call a short arm inspection at 2 o'clock in the morning. The sergeant called us out. I couldn't even pull my pants up because my arms were so sore where they gave me all these shots. That comes back to my mind.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, did that put you behind schedule in your training, or did you finish with everybody else?
I finished.
Okay. All right. Now, at that point, after those 6 weeks of basic training, what did you do next?
Well, they sent me to Rock Island, Illinois, to Augustana College
Mm-hmm.
for what they call a CTD, College Training Detachment, because I was on campus for about almost 3 months, and that was we went from Mississippi to Chicago on Augustana College. From Augustana College, I went to Texas, San Antonio, Texas.
Right. Okay. Let's go back to Augustana College. Why were you there?
Well, that was to get basic training in a regular first year college,
Okay.
especially in math. And I was an A student in math in high school. I had no trouble doing that when I was there. And we had a little history, English, the rest of the usual first year
Okay.
subjects in college.
Now, did you know why they thought you had to do that? Why was that necessary to send you to college first?
Well, that's part of their. The Navy had a similar program
Mm-hmm.
when they were going through that early officers training.
Right.
And so in the Army Air Corps, they call it CTD.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, after that, they sent me to San Antonio,
Right.
Texas.
Okay. All right. And then what did you do there?
Well, that was called preflight, and some of our tests, we put 2 days taking tests to qualify for different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I qualified for pilot, navigator, and bombardier.
Mm-hmm.
But all the time I wanted to be a navigator, so I got that.
Right. Because everybody wanted to be a pilot, right?
Mostly.
Yeah. So they were probably happy to have you wanting to be a navigator.
Well, they say you got your choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got it.
Okay. And now, when they're training you to be a navigator, what are you learning?
Well, in pre-flight, that was a 2 or 3 month course. They didn't have room in navigation school to send me there.
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, they sent me to Gunnery School in Harlingen, Texas, and I was there most of 6 weeks learning air-to-air gunnery, and I earned my wings in the Gunnery School,
Mm-hmm.
and they were sergeant or corporal. But when I went to navigation school, when I finished that superseded the bombardier school.
Mhm.
I mean,
Gunnery school, yeah.
And it was almost 4 months in navigation school.
Mm-hmm.
We trained mostly in C-45, 2-engine aircraft, had a little twin tail. They became, the leftover planes from that became civilian transport of some kind.
Well, that was maybe the C-47.
C-40.
That becomes the DC-3.
C-45 I was in my navigation school.
Okay. All right. But now for navigation at that kind, I mean, what are they actually teaching you?
Well, weather and map reading and all about air-to-air navigation, they called it.
Mm-hmm.
Weather, we took a full course in that, but they needed people going to Europe, so I learned all of their methods over there.
Mm-hmm.
And when later on when the VE day came, they sent me the other way. I didn't need any of that stuff.
Okay. Well, you had gone in 1943, so So you must go through a lot of training before you're ready to fly. I mean, how long do you think you spent in training when you add it all up?
Well, I put in 100 hours and
In flying?
no, I was in C-45s
Yeah.
when I took the training in navigation.
Right, right.
But I didn't fly that aircraft.
Okay.
They only had 3 desks behind the co-pilot, and so we were doing paperwork and all that. We learned how to do reading ground through a tube, and later, in the later years, that came in handy. But when we finished there, when we finished navigation school, they sent me to Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts, and I was Dow Air Force Base. I think Dow. I forget the name of that base. Anyway, Chicopee Falls, and we trained to go to Europe. And several times we were on a standby. Actually, when Roosevelt died, the funeral service, our plane was on standby. We didn't fly over the funeral procession. One of the other planes in my outfit did. But so I was at Westover Field. Yeah, Westover Field at that time.
Okay.
No, Downfield was in Bangor, Maine. I flew in there later.
All right. Okay. Now, basically, you're spending the latter part of 1943 and then all of 1944 still training and on different bases in the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what kind of living conditions did you have at these places?
Well, officers had excellent. Yeah, because I was in our officer
Right.
barracks. We had better living conditions than some of the other guys, but
Okay. And would you get to go off base and into town and do things?
well, there was when I was in Westover Field, Massachusetts. I got every other weekend off, and my folks lived only 200 or 300 miles away, so I'd go back home because they lived up in Maine. I could take transport into Boston and transfer it and go up. And my dad worked at that time for the Maine Central Railroad, so there was no problem.
So, yeah, getting railroad tickets then, yeah.
No. Well, as in the military, they gave them to you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And I don't know, at the different bases that you stayed at, were some of them nicer places than others or better places to stay? Did you like some places better than other ones?
Well, I can't really complain about any.
Okay. All right. Now, when you were in the South, when you were in Mississippi or Texas or someplace like that, did you notice the segregation in the society?
Actually, I didn't notice that at all. I know later when I was in medical training in Chicago, they had quite a separation there.
Yeah, that was different. Yeah, but I guess probably off in the basic training, you're just kind of off on the base on your own.
Well, see, there were no blacks in my outfit in the military.
Right. Yeah.
When I was in Japan, later in the occupation, sometimes I'd run into a black outfit, and they kind of tried to scare me because they're going to take me out in the country and dump me off. But they never did.
Yeah. But that was all later on. I mean, at this
Well,
point.
I mean, a lot of it was kind of a scare technique, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to go back here to your story. So you got a chance. You got to go home at least when you were in Massachusetts, and you had fairly good living conditions. Do you have a sense that you took longer than most people did to finish, or?
Well, when we were waiting to get orders to go to Europe, I kind of got that feeling.
Yeah. Okay. So, because you mentioned you're still in the United States when Roosevelt dies, and that's early '45. And then what happens after that?
Well, I was still at Westover Field, Massachusetts, right up until VE Day, and then we knew then we weren't going to Europe,
Hmm.
but they had been kind of slowing up on our transfers to go to Europe anyway, and it was because they didn't need it over
Mhm.
there. Now, navigation and bombardiers, when the last year I think they flew over Europe, sometimes every third or ninth plane they had a navigator and a bombardier. Because when the lead plane opened the Bombay, the rest of them did the same thing. And when the bombardier said bombs away, they all did.
Right.
So they didn't have those officers over there because
Okay.
they put in a lot of money in training us guys.
Mhm. Okay, but they changed the way they were doing things, and so now they had too many of you.
Yeah, they had enough planes and gunners
Hmm.
to do the job. They didn't need those extra officers.
Right. So you wind up being stuck in Massachusetts. Okay. Now you eventually do get orders to go overseas, though. What happens after VE Day?
VE Day, a week later, the captain or the officer in charge of our base in Westover Field called us all together and said, now you know where you're going. And we all nodded, yep.
Mm-hmm.
And they put us on Pullman cars, but it took them 3 days to do that because they could put us on coaches until we ruined those coaches because they had problems with Pullmans and we didn't get them. We got down there, the Mississippi, where you cross the Mississippi going west.
Mm-hmm.
They stopped the train out in the yards because some of the guys went ahead and took a shower on the platform in the railroad station, and the Army and everybody else didn't like that. So they stopped there. They did what they were supposed to do in the first place. And they put us on Pullmans the last 3 days to Idaho, Boise, Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
I was there the 4th of July, 1940.
45.
45.
Yeah, 4th of July, 1945.
Right.
And we were there, I was there that 4th of July weekend, so I was able to go to church, go to summer camp in Caldwell, Idaho with some of the people from my church background. And of course, next day we left Boise, went to Salinas, California, stayed there, got a brand new plane. We had to check all the instruments, the gas consumption and everything, because in a few days we'd be going overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Mesa Field from Salinas, California, and we left around 8:30 at night for Hawaii, flew all night. And the only thing I remember about that, I had to stay awake all night to know where we were going, where we were at, because I was a navigator.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to Hawaii around 10 the next morning. Then he had a time change in there and all that
Mhm.
stuff. So we actually flew all night getting to Hawaii. And one of my instruments didn't work like it should, so I reported that. And they found out what the problem was. The only problem was it didn't work where we were at.
Mm-hmm.
West of there it did.
Okay.
So we were in Hawaii probably 24 hours and headed west from there to Johnson Island, but landed at Tarawa, stayed there one night, and went to Los Negros, stayed there one night. During that time we crossed the equator and the international date line. And from Los Negros, we were scheduled to go to Hollandia, New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
They changed our orders and we went to New Guinea. I went to Biak, New
Yeah.
Guinea,
Okay.
and that was the very western tip of New Guinea. And within eyesight of my base there, you could see an island that was held by Japs at that point. and the war was still on when we got there. But during that time, they dropped the A-bomb on Hiroshima. I joined my outfit with it about a week later. We stayed in Manila for 5 or 6 days on the way. And during the time when we flew from Manila to my base in Iejima, Okinawa, the plane with the Japanese dignitaries looking at the armistice terms and stuff, they passed us going south, we were going north.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that because some of the people in my outfit got pictures of that. I didn't have them, but
Okay. All right. So then you get to Iejima really just as the war ends.
well, see when the war officially ended, I was actually at my base in Okinawa,
Mm-hmm.
little island on the coast of Okinawa, but
Yeah. Yeah.
and when the war ended, within say a month, we had to go in for occupation, and they broke our outfits up. I was assigned to another outfit. It happened to be C-46s, a transport plane
Mm-hmm.
made by Curtiss Aircraft. We were in that outfit for a little over a month,
Mm-hmm.
and the base in Japan that we were at that time was called Yokota, Yokota,
Mm-hmm.
and we were there for a month and a half, almost 2 months. And then they transferred my outfit to Korea, Seoul, Korea,
Mm-hmm.
and they put me in C-46s, the C-47s, yeah. The leftover aircraft from the aircraft that came from India up into China, so we got older aircraft, but we didn't need anything that could fly those high altitude.
All right. Now, as you're going to these different places, when you're at Okinawa, you're in Japan, you're in Korea, were you flying regular missions?
I flew once a month on board an aircraft. I didn't actually pilot a plane.
Right, I know, but you used to have to fly as a navigator. But
And most of our trips were trips to transfer people from Tokyo to Manila and back. And sometimes we had a load of mail.
mm-hmm.
So that if they loaded the plane with mail, that's when we flew back.
Okay.
So it wasn't always personnel, there was quite often mail.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the places you were at. In Iejima, for instance, on Okinawa, what was that facility like? What was there?
It's kind of hard to remember.
Does he remember when a Japanese man came into the barracks and he was in the latrine and he blew up the
What?
barracks? When the Japanese man came into the barracks and blew up the barracks when you were in the latrine?
Well, when we were that week when the war ended, I was in Manila at a transfer base, whatever you call it. A Jap came down out of the hills and killed 4 or 5 people in a tent next to mine. One reason he didn't come in my tent, because I was up all night with diarrhea,
Mm-hmm.
going to what they call the slit trench.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably saved my life that I had that.
There you go.
And somebody spotted him middle of the night when he cut the throats of these guys sleeping, and they shot him. But
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I guess so at Iejima, there probably wasn't really very much at Iejima. It's just a little island, and there would be an airfield and not much else.
well, there were 2 bomb groups on that airfield.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was 403rd, but I don't know what the other one was.
Right.
And the island could hardly the island was about 9 miles long and 3 or 4 miles wide. 3 or 4 months before I got to that island, a reporter by the name of Ernie Powell was killed
Mm-hmm.
about a mile from where I was.
Right.
But 3 or 4 months before I got there.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then when you went to Japan, when you went to Yokota, Japan, did you see much of the Japanese people while you were there?
They treated us like visitors.
Mm-hmm.
They were real polite, and there was no more hatred. I mean, that was gone. And when I was down at the big hotel in Tokyo, General MacArthur came down the elevator across the hotel lobby, probably about 50 feet from where I was,
Mm-hmm.
because I saw him at that time. So, because he stayed on the upper floor of that same hotel.
Okay. All right. Now, did you see much of damage from the bombings in Japan?
Well, like I say, we flew over Hiroshima about a week after the A-bomb was dropped, so I got to see that. When we moved into occupation in Tokyo, 3 of us guys took a hike down through southern suburbs of Tokyo,
Mm-hmm.
and we could see all the damage because the whole neighborhood had been just burned right down.
Right.
So the cement floor to a lot of these buildings was there. We heard a noise underneath one of the floors. We bent over and peeked in, and we were invited inside. And it happened to be the 2 groups from the Italian embassy and the German embassy were having a few drinks.
Mm-hmm.
They invited us to have a drink with them, and we talked together. And so they were getting together, but there was nothing left upstairs. It was all burned out.
Right.
And there was a Christian school that the 3 of us guys visited one day, and they told us that all the kids in that school had been ordered up into the mountains not to be in that area, and luckily they weren't because that area had been burned out.
Mm-hmm.
That was the American Bible Society, and there was 3 Christian groups tied together at that time. So I got to talk to them.
Okay. Now, was the school itself still standing, or was the school building standing, or did they have to rebuild that?
I don't remember too much about that.
Okay. All right. And then you said you also went to Seoul, Korea. Were you based there for a while? Or did you just fly there and fly back?
Well, after the war ended,
Yeah.
it was mostly to fly in, pick up either mail, and very seldom any people.
Mm-hmm.
Now we were involved in transporting the 11th Airborne from Manila to Tokyo,
Mm-hmm.
and they were being stationed in a place they call Sendai, north of Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
So we were involved in that.
Did you ever move any Japanese people around? Did you ever take any Japanese people
No.
in the aircraft? Just Americans?
Actually, when I was at that Christian compound in Tokyo, what?
No, you're fine.
One of the people working for the Red Cross asked me if I wanted to deliver a letter from their office in Tokyo to Seoul, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
There was somebody that had been involved in Christian work, because most of my contacts were Christian people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, when you're in places like Japan or Korea or the Philippines after the war, there was still a lot of problems in society, and there were also a lot of temptations for a lot of the soldiers. There were women, and there was drinking and that kind of thing. So, did any of the men in your unit get involved with that?
Well, not my unit, but when I was in Tokyo shortly after the occupation duty, if a sailor or a military because then that custom was leave your shoes on the doorstep
Mhm.
before you go in.
Right.
So when the SPs, shore police, would spot some American shoes, they knew that there was an American in
Mhm.
that particular building. So that caused a problem with them, not with my outfit.
Okay. So your people were better disciplined and better behaved.
Well, they didn't need that drinks, they didn't need sex and
Mhm.
all. But the other guys got in trouble with that.
Right. Okay. Now, how long did you spend in Japan?
Well, when I got orders to come back stateside,
Mhm.
they sent me to the town they call Tachikawa, Japan. I was there, 5 or 6 weeks.
Okay.
And we got orders to board a ship
Okay.
in Yokohama.
Mhm.
And that ship, we had to sign away our grade. In other words, we couldn't use our captain and our lieutenancy and all that to gain any privileges. We had to sign that away like we were like an enlisted man. There were 3,000 of us on board that ship, and all of us had to do the same thing. And some of us had to put duty on the ship. A buddy of mine was a radio operator, so I got to television, not television, telephone.
Mhm.
That I got a job doing that, so I didn't have to start guard duty. But they had people, even a lieutenant, second lieutenant, standing guard duty, which.
Okay. So you had to sort of give up your rank because they didn't have room for officers?
Well, they didn't want the ruckus that could result from it.
Okay. So everyone had to be treated the same. Okay.
Right.
But I was asking before that, how long did you stay in Japan in total? I mean, how many months do you think you were in Japan?
Because I wasn't there all that time.
Okay.
Well, when we boarded that ship from Yokohama, that's when I left Japan.
Right.
We landed at Seattle, Washington.
Mhm.
2 weeks later, Fort Lewis.
Mhm.
And at Fort Lewis, we were assigned to transport out of there. I got to Fort Lewis the day before Mother's Day, 1946.
Mhm.
And so we had sent a Mother's Day card to my folks. See you soon.
Mhm.
And that meant I was back in the States.
Right.
So a mail, even when I was in Korea, I could send a letter to the east coast of Maine, and my folks would have it in 3 days.
Mhm.
I mean, it went airmail, whether you put airmail on it or not.
Right. Okay. So then, now, did the Mother's Day card get there before you did?
Oh yeah, quite a bit.
Okay.
See, we were on the coach, or whatever you call it, from Seattle, Fort Dix, New Jersey,
Mhm.
because about 2/3 of our train dropped there, people off there, and my 2 or 3 cars I was in, we went all the way to Fort Devens in Massachusetts,
Right.
where I had went in the first place. I was there 3 or 4 days, and that's when we had to turn in everything. I had a sidearm, a 45 caliber pistol. I turned that in. I did everything. And they didn't have record of it because a typhoon had gone through Okinawa and wiped out all the records. I didn't know that, but
Okay. But you did what you were supposed to. Now, after you got home, what did you do next?
well, I got down to business about checking into going to medical school.
Okay.
I had kind of settled my mind on going to medical school in Syracuse, New York. My family doctor, my folks' family doctor, were osteopaths, and they wanted me to go that route. And I applied for osteopathic school, and I didn't apply for the medical school. And I was accepted for an interview at Des Moines, Iowa, and Chicago. And Chicago was closer to where my back home.
Right.
I hadn't met my wife at that time.
Now, at this point, though, don't you need an undergraduate degree first?
Yeah, that was at Augustana.
So you actually got the equivalent of a college degree at Augustana?
Okay, I skipped that.
Okay.
When I got out of the military, when I was at Augustana in the first place, I was dating a daughter to the head of the biology department. And so I called that professor up when I got out, and I said I wanted to go to get my pre-med. He said, "You're in." That's all he said. And he put me up in his house the first year, going back to Augustana. And when I graduated from Augustana, I had my undergraduate degree for pre-med, what
Right.
they call pre-med.
Okay. And then from there, then you go to Chicago.
I went to Chicago.
And Chicago has an osteopathic hospital and school there in the city.
In Chicago.
All right.
But my graduate school, what was that? Chicago.
Okay. And then, so then you became a doctor at that point. What did you do next?
Well, I had signed up for an internship in Milwaukee. My wife was due to have a baby that same week I was supposed to go, which happened to be her birthday, July 2nd. And so one of the professors was late on getting his paperwork in for me to do it anyway. So they all just kind of worked together. So I lost my internship and my deposit on my first month there and all that. I had to wait over 6 months to get my internship, which happened to be out east where my mother was a practical nurse. She told the head of the surgical department that her son had graduated from school, but they hadn't released him yet. That doctor in Waterville, Maine, called my school in Chicago. They released me the next day. So then I had to get my stuff together to take off. And she was just a little bit at that time. I put her, I don't know if you're familiar with the old banana boxes. Well, I had a coupe. And it just fit nicely back of my seat, lengthwise,
Okay.
with blankets.
All right.
She was it. That was around February, March. And so she was a little over 6 months old, 8 months old. And we made a trip out east, cut across Canada on the way. Because I've been across many a time from
Well, sure.
Detroit across.
Right.
And when we went across New York's Thruway, we had a problem because that was a real wintry day. Snowbanks so high you couldn't see anything on the other side. But that's the way it was in New York anyway.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you did your internship in Maine then?
In Maine.
Okay. And then where do you wind up practicing?
Actually, after I finished the internship, I took my boards in Maine, became a licensed doctor in Maine after the internship. Practiced a year and a half in East Rochester, New Hampshire. And I also got a reciprocity on my license because I had national boards at that time. And so they took the national board. The New Hampshire Medical License Board did not accept any osteopathic boards, but they did take the national board. And even if it was an osteopathic national board, they took that, but none of the other boards that had to do with my previous license.
Mhm.
So actually for a year and a half, I had a license in Maine and New Hampshire. But her aunt lived in Detroit, and her grandma lived in East Gary, Indiana. So we decided to come to Michigan
Mhm.
because it's closer to their relatives,
Right.
mostly what satisfied my wife.
Mhm.
Well, there were about 15 or 20 doctors in Grand Rapids that I had gone to school with in Chicago. And I got to talking to one of them. He talked me into going to Big Rapids, Michigan,
Mhm.
because they needed another deal up there with a group that kind of Grand Rapids. And so that's what I did. And well, before we left Maine, your brother came along. When I was in New Hampshire, her brother was born in a place in Maine called Saco, S-A-C-O,
Mhm.
Twin City to Biddeford. Biddeford had a good pillowcase and shirt sheet industry,
Mhm.
Biddeford sheets, real known at that time.
All right. Okay. So now to look back at the time that you spent in the Army, I guess first of all, are there other events or things that happened that sort of stand out in your memory that you haven't talked about yet?
In Australia, around Australia?
Did
Huh?
you
Anything
ever-
around Australia?
I never went to Australia.
Did you get near it?
Did you get close to Australia?
Well, on the North Shore of New Guinea, that's
Yeah.
about as close as I got.
Okay. Was there a story in mind that?
Well, one night we were having evening movies in Biak, New Guinea. And when they turned the lights off for intermission, there was an Australian, Aussie they call him, sitting right next to me. Because he walked in to watch the same movies.
Mhm.
That's the only time I got to meet one
Okay,
and talk
you
to
got me
one.
one. All right. Now, when you think back to the time when you were in the service, how do you think that affected you, or what did you learn from that?
Helped me to grow up. But I had my mindset. See, I had an aunt and an uncle that were doctors.
Mhm.
They graduated from medical school in Kirksville, Missouri. My mother was a practical nurse in the local hospital,
Mhm.
so I wanted to be a doctor.
Mhm.
So that kind of got me going way back before I went to military and all.
Okay. Now, were you able to use GI benefits to help pay for school?
Had the GI Bill.
Mhm.
It paid the balance of my, that paid my pre-medical degree
Mhm.
and 3 years of my medical school.
Mhm.
And during that time, I had met this gal from church. We got married, and her Blue Cross paid for
Yeah.
the medical stuff.
Mhm.
And she also had money enough in her income to pay a good part of my last year in medical school.
Mhm.
During my internship, she used her teacher's retirement to live on. And within a year after I got out of internship, I was earning enough to pay my own way and
Mhm.
cover everything.
Very good. All right. Well, it makes for a good story. So thank you for taking the time to share your story today.
Hope I didn't stumble around too much.
No, it's fine.